Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session where we're going to be focusing on the fact that facts don't move people, but feelings do. And this really is in the context of first meetings. Now, I've been fascinated by the first meeting process. It's always amazed me that a perfect stranger might meet you, and in the course of maybe an hour, they will feel comfortable enough, hopefully, to hand over their life savings for you to manage. So, what has to happen for that exchange to progress? Well, it turns out that there are actually four things that perfect strangers want from a first meeting. And if you can deliver them, you can expect a conversion rate of around 71%. So, I will be revealing those four things as we go through. But before we get into the nitty gritty, hello, I'm Melissa. And if we've not met before, I specialize in helping those in the finance sector to communicate more effectively. I'm particularly interested in helping financial planning firms win and keep more clients. My background is psychology. My first job was a copywriter. So it was my job to write the words on people's websites and brochures. And I could really see there was this gap between what people were writing and people were reading, and then what people were understanding and then doing or not doing. So I trained to be a coach. I went off and studied psychology, and this May I conducted some research, and I spoke to over 100 advisors about their first meeting process. I was really interested to find out what they struggle with, and what are some of the people that are getting really high conversions, what are they doing differently. So I'll share some of my findings as we go through. I don't want to talk too much about me. If you'd like to find out more, that's my LinkedIn profile at the end of that QR code, so do scan that if that's of interest. In terms of what we'll cover today, I want to highlight four common mistakes that advisors make when they are trying to communicate how valuable the advice process is, or they are to people's lives. So there are four things that jump out quite a lot, which can really get in the way of clients going, actually, yes, I definitely want to engage this person. We'll look at how you strike the right balance between facts, feelings, and then framing your value. There's definitely an art to this. And it's important that we have an appreciation of this and can do this really before we start talking about fees. And then lastly, I will show you a process that you can follow, which will help you basically increase your conversions without sounding salesy. So it is being recorded, and I'll send the replay to all of those of you who've registered. I'll present for about 30-ish minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. And I'll ask for chat as we go. You can change the chat to communicate to me directly or just to everyone. So why does this matter? Why should we be focused on first meetings? Of all the things that we could focus on, why this? Well, I believe that it is one of the most profitable hours or so that you can spend. If you look at this table, you'll see that actually the average lifetime value of a client is pretty high. And these are quite conservative figures. They don't, for example, take into account all the referral opportunities that no doubt will be coming your way. And not only that, the churn, as in the rate of clients that you lose, tends to be quite low in financial services. You tend to hang on to your clients for fairly relatively long periods of time. So this is why honing your skills, making sure that you've got a really slick, high converting process is a really good investment of time and resources in my book. The other thing you might be interested to know is that people tend to only interview one or two advisors before making their final decision. This was some study, a Morningstar study. So this is why we really don't want to be rehearsing in front of them. We want to be fluent, we want to be confident, we want to be competent in what we're saying. And that often means we need to practice. So how did I carry out my research? Well, I asked my Humanizing Money audience. So I have a fortnightly newsletter that goes out. And I asked whether anyone would give me 30 minutes of their time for me to interview them about their process. So I spoke to a huge range of people from very established firms who were converting up to sort of 90% conversions to people that weren't getting any. I spoke to solo advisors, large firms, a real mix. And I asked them, how happy are you with your ratios? A big mix. Then I asked them how to describe their first meeting process. I asked if any areas caused them a sense of discomfort or, they found it, uneasy when they got to that part of the meeting. I then analyzed my data for themes, like what was jumping out. And as well, I then drew on existing research. There's quite a lot of research out there around first meetings, but actually not much in terms of how to. So this is why I've created a mentoring program which addresses some of the challenges that I found in this research, which I'll talk about at the end. So the key findings: many firms aren't converting opportunities as regularly as they would like. Some had been, and then they'd kind of dropped off and they weren't sure why. The top areas of discomfort were, in number one spot, communicating their value effectively. And this is partly why I've developed this particular session. People just found it really hard to know what clients were looking for, how technical to go. They just found it very difficult. Related to that is discussing fees. And of course, there's quite a lot of change with many big providers in the industry changing their fees. And that was causing some unease for many advisors. Again, related to that, asking for the business. Clearly, if you find it difficult to convert difficult to communicate your value, and then you're going to find it difficult to talk about fees, then asking for the business follows on from that. And that can be a source of unease for many. Then beyond the meeting, even if they have made all the right noises and looked like they were keen to go ahead, then you hear nothing from them, absolute crickets. And people weren't sure what to say in that situation. It's a tricky situation to be in. No one wants to sound desperate. You don't want to sound pushy. And yet it can be so disappointing and so infuriating as well to feel like you've been ghosted. And then the other challenge was, how do we get the right people in the top of the funnel? How do we attract the right kind of people that we want to work with, that we want to have that long relationship with? How do we attract those kinds of people? So let's focus on the communicating your value piece. So how do we do this? How do we make sure that we're doing what we can so that the prospect on the other side of the screen or the table feels like at the end of the meeting, they are very happy to hand over their life savings for you to manage? Well, let's start by unpacking how we make decisions in the first place. And you may be aware that within our brain, we have sort of three brains. We have our oldest part of our brain, the reptilian brain, and this is where our instinct sits. So this is the fight, flight, freeze, fornicate response. That's really, really old, below conscious control. Then we have our limbic brain. So this is where our emotions sit. This is where, when we're making decisions, this is what motivates us. This is the primary way that we make decisions. And then we have our neocortex, which is the newest part of our brain. That's responsible for logic. It's responsible for planning. It's responsible for creative thinking, for imagination. And we tend to make decisions using emotions and then justify with logic. So if we run our meetings and we are only focused on the logic part of the value that we bring, the facts and the figures and the performances and the percentages, we're missing out a really key part of how prospects make decisions. So we've got to make sure that our questions and our structure is designed in such a way that it taps into this emotional part of the brain as well. So that was a very brief overview of how we make decisions, but let's look at how we unpack value. Like, where do prospects and clients derive value from? And Boring Money, a brilliant organization, you may have come across them, created this framework last year. I think it really was in response to Consumer Duty, looking at how do you communicate fair value how do you communicate fair value essentially to demonstrate that you're meeting Consumer Duty regulation. And you will see here that the biggest chunk is trust and peace of mind. That is where the majority of clients derive their value. Of course, that rests on them feeling understood by you, them feeling like you've understood what's important to them, what's coming down the track, that all that planning that you do is, again, very, very valuable. And then you'll see that the information, the performance, and the fees makes up the rest of it. You might know the Vanguard Client Connect study has just came out in October, and they were able to demonstrate that the investors that they had interviewed agreed that working with an advisor added around 6.5% to the performance value of their portfolio. So we need both, essentially. But what we mustn't forget is that, and this was reiterated by the Vanguard study as well, 76% of people say their advisor provides peace of mind, which enhances their mental and emotional well-being. So it's a really big chunk of people derive their value from the peace of mind that you offer. So they're not buying a plan as such, they're buying this peace of mind that comes with it. So with that in mind, we need to think about how we are structuring our meeting, how we're structuring our process so that they understand this is what we can deliver. But how do we do this, especially if someone has never had advice before? It's very difficult for them to judge how valuable something is, how valuable this process is, if they've never had it. And this is why that first meeting really needs to act more as a taster session, more as you're giving them an experience of what it would be like to work with you. And this is why we need to demonstrate our value through asking good questions, through settling their minds, through making them feel safe, like they can be open to share their challenges with us, to share any vulnerabilities that they might have, any fears. And that's how we start to settle their minds and get some, a deep rapport and trust. But let's look at the 4 mistakes that I often see advisors making. Obviously, they're not making them intentionally, but when we recognize them, we're in a stronger position to avoid them. So the first is adopting the wrong mindset. And this is often, can be for lots of reasons, but what I've noticed is that when there's especially some unease around fees, they're not convinced of the value that they bring. There's some self-doubt, they might suffer from imposter syndrome, there might be lots of things going on here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Asking ineffective questions. So this is where they don't necessarily have an appreciation of the importance of the emotional part of the brain and how important that is in making decisions. So often the conversation sort of focuses much more on the technical side of the advice that you bring and offer. Advisors often talk too much and don't listen enough. And again, this might be because they've come in with a technical question. That's what's triggered the inquiry. And because you're so well trained, you dive into the technical side, and that has lots of impact, which we'll talk about more. And then lastly, they don't necessarily have a psychology-informed structure for the meeting or process, indeed. And that means they can often wing it. And that's okay, but it might mean that you're missing opportunities. So I'd love to know, of all those that I've mentioned, which do you think you recognize the most? You can use the chat. Is it mindset? Is it asking ineffective questions? Perhaps you're talking a bit too much. Often that's because, we want to help, We get quite excited about the technical side of things. Um, or maybe we don't really have a structure. Mostly one. Not convinced of the value you bring. Mostly one. Okay. Oh, you're all ones. Okay, that's really interesting. Last time I ran this, absolutely no one was one. So okay, wrong mindset. Okay, thank you for sharing that. So we'll spend a bit more time on that one then this morning. Okay, anyone else? Yeah, number two. Okay, fine. Well, the good news is these are all quite easily solvable. So let's start with the value then. What I notice is that, and this is often a very human trait, is that when we feel like when something is easy for us, that automatically erodes its value. We sort of assume that everyone finds this easy. And therefore, that can start to seed in this doubt that we might feel around charging or, yeah, around fees and so on. So, what I will say, and you've no doubt heard this before, but the first sale is to yourself. So, how much do you believe in the impact that you are having on people's lives? You know, how much, when you're thinking about lifestyle financial planning, how much do you actually believe that life isn't a rehearsal? That we really need to be using money as a tool to help live a really exciting big life. That's really one of the things to first think about is really, do you actually believe in the value of your work? And actually, just before I go on to that, when I run the mentoring program, one of the things that often comes up in this area is that I will ask people to think about some of the stories that they can share that have really made a difference to clients' lives. So whether that might be moving a retirement date early, forward by a couple of years, or doing that round the world trip that they've always wanted to do, or paying for a wedding, or, something that's really made a difference to their lives. And when you have those kind of stories front and center in your mind, when you're going into these first meetings, it becomes much, much easier to almost convince yourself that what you're doing has great value to the other person. And so, yeah, I would really challenge you to think about the impact that you're having. And sometimes when I've asked clients this, they're like, I don't actually know. I don't know what impact my work has. And so that's really one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to pick up at your annual planning meetings. Is to really find out what's happening in their lives as a result of your planning. They will, I'm sure, be happy to tell you because that's really why they are engaging you in the first place. So I think that would be your homework for those of you who aren't feel like you're adopting the wrong mindset. Get a body of stories together to help cement the value in your mind. The second is asking ineffective questions, and this also might be linked to your mindset. So what I want to distinguish is the difference between human questions and technical questions. Now, this is the work of Neil Parker, who I've drawn on extensively. I think he's brilliant. Do look him up. He's run lots of webinars on the Power platform, the PFS Power platform. And essentially, a little question is something like, shall I go for a drawdown or annuity? Is this a good fund? I've got a pension and an ISA, but what do I do with them now? I don't want to fritter this windfall away. Perhaps they've inherited a lump sum. Where shall I invest it? Or my pension is performing poorly and I need to change it. So these are often the questions that people will come in and ask you in a first meeting. And they are characterized by there's typically a product or a transaction involved. They're quite generic and they think that the answer is found with you or on Google or, their mate down the pub. So it's not within them, it's external. Now, the big questions, the big human questions are one of two typically, is do I have enough to retire early or to last me if I'm going to get divorced? And will I always have enough? So whatever people are asking you, underneath it typically is this human question. This is a big question. And they are characterized by, they are about life. They're not about transactions. They are personal. And as a result of them being personal, the prospect or the client has the answer within them. It's not for you to tell them like how they want to live their life. Yes, you can advise them on what kind of price tag would be associated with different options, but the answer resides with them. So essentially, when people are coming in to that first meeting and they're asking a little technical question like, which pension should I choose? We then have to take them on a mindset shifting journey to translate that small question into a big question, which is, do I have enough and will I always have enough? And answering that question is incredibly valuable. It's incredibly valuable. And that's really where a lot of the peace of mind will come from. So when we're thinking about the impact of asking effective questions, there are lots of benefits. And the first is when we suddenly start asking human questions, we create this curiosity gap. And you'll know yourself, if you had good teachers at school, perhaps they sparked your curiosity by encouraging you to think about something that you didn't know the answer to. And when that happens, we become really motivated to fill that gap. It's like this cognitive itch that we want to scratch. So this is what we want to be doing. We want to be sort of posing questions, gently guiding our prospect to realize that actually these are the questions that they have. And that's going to motivate them to move forward. We're looking at changing their meaning making. So moving away from problem solving, is it this fund or that fund, into, well, actually, what does money need to do in my life? What's the job money has in my life? So yes, they're bigger, they're more philosophical questions. But really, when you are asking these questions, essentially, they have a sense that you're interested more in them as a person rather than their money. When you're asking these questions and they are talking about their ideas or their hopes or their plans, they're more likely to own them themselves. So rather than being told what they need to do, they're owning them. They're more likely to act on them. And again, you see them become more motivated to act. And when we are good at listening and we are not interrupting and we're letting them talk and expand on what they're saying, that's generating this bonding hormone in their brain, which is called oxytocin, and that really strengthens the relationship. And that's so important to do in a first meeting. We want the prospect to leave that meeting feeling like they're understood by you. They feel seen, they don't feel judged, and they are willing to hand over their life savings for you to manage. So yes, those benefits of asking effective questions, as a recap, create a curiosity gap, shifting their mindset, they're more motivated to move forward, and it strengthens your bond. So it's really important that we spend time crafting good questions for this meeting. The third mistake, kind of linked to the top, the second one, is talking too much and not listening enough. Now, none of you actually said this on this session, which is kind of good to hear. But often, one of two things happen when we talk too much. Either we don't create enough of a curiosity gap. So if they've come in saying, should I do an annuity or drawdown? And we dive straight into that answer by asking them about interest rates and salaries and all that sort of thing, what might happen is then they'll leave that meeting going, that was brilliant. I learned a lot. I'm going to go off and do it myself. So we have been very generous with our expertise. And unfortunately, stifled the progress of them becoming a client. Now, some people, and this is why if you've been on any of my sessions before, I'm a big fan of having a screening step before you get to the first meeting, but that's for another day. So essentially, by the time they've got to the first meeting that they have some urgency, that they are a good fit, and they're in the kind of right ballpark for you to work with them and to add value with them. So that's when there was not enough curiosity gap through the conversation, or the gap becomes too big by us asking questions and overwhelming the client. So, have you thought about protection? Have you thought about tax strategies? Have you, and they've just come in with a one question, and we kind of overwhelm them. And what that can lead to is them just feeling stuck and a bit helpless, and then they don't want to move forward. So it's definitely an art and a skill to be able to judge how much of a gap to create. The other thing to say when we're talking too much is that we are not learning. And really the objective of this meeting is to get to know the person so that they leave, as I keep saying, feeling really seen and understood. Now, the fourth mistake is really lacking a psychology-informed meeting structure. And this is really where often people will wing it, will get really sucked down technical holes and spend a lot of time there, rather than thinking about, okay, how do I need to run this meeting so that we identify the need and the fit and the next steps. So how do we strike this balance? Well, really, this is where understanding what those four things that prospects want in this first meeting. And this was some studies that Vouched For did. And they said that prospects who couldn't have felt more comfortable being open. So this is why being in that right mindset, making sure that you're creating this dynamic, which feels really non-judgmental, very open, that you're really interested in what they're saying, you're listening deeply, they're happy to share their challenges with you. They had an in-depth discussion on their motivations. So this is why understanding, remember that the emotional part of our brain is where the motivation is created. And this is why we want to spend a lot of time in the meeting talking about what they want to do, or what's driving the decision to take advice. People who they couldn't have been clearer on how the advisor would help. So maybe you've taken them through that journey and you've identified that actually they don't know their enough number, and they don't know, there's a number of gaps in their knowledge that they then want to fill, and that's what your process is designed to do. And prospects who learned a lot, so that could be learning about themselves or learning about your process, that's where you have this very, very high conversion rate of 71%. So by taking them through that process, essentially you're blending, their feelings. You're listening to when you ask them, what's prompted you to get in touch, or what's made you contact us. We're listening for both facts and feelings. When people tell you why they've come to see you, they'll generally talk about, oh, well, I want to move, they're wanting to move towards something that they want, or they're wanting to move away from something that they don't want. And when you're able to listen deeply and identify that, it's much easier for you then to talk about your fees, because that's what you can link your fee structure to what they've said that they want. Of course, you need to bring in some facts by identifying where they are now and where they're trying to get to. And then really what they see and what they experience is you being able to fill in those missing pieces through your process. That's how you can answer those little technical questions. That's what your process is designed to do. And that's how you can frame value in a way that's really conversational. And they just have that experience of, yes, I can see how this all fits together. There's a really lovely analogy that Neil Parker uses, which is essentially he likens financial planners to really being like architects. And it's almost as if you are building somebody's future. So when they initially come and see you, you are essentially standing on a plot of land, and you're looking around at what the materials are on site. So you're looking at bricks and you're looking at timber, And then there, essentially, if they come in and ask you a little technical question, he likens that to saying, well, how many bricks do we need? And of course, the architect will say, well, it depends what we're trying to build. Well, I'm trying to build a house, or I'm trying to build, a structure. Well, what do you need it to do? And then we can start designing around that. So he likens, your role in this meeting as being rather like an architect. And then you go on to the engineering side, and then you go on to the building. And I think that's a really nice analogy. So I just want to finish off by showing you this system that I've created in the mentoring program, which is really designed to help you increase your conversions. And it's called the Finesse Your First Meeting program. And it focuses on what to do before, during, and after a typical meeting. So the first part is really focused on what do we do before we even get to the first meeting. And a lot of it really rests on recognizing who you actually want to work for. Who are the people that you are happy when their phone rings on you can see their name on their phone, and you're like, yeah, I really like working with those people. And we start looking at how you hold those introductory calls. How do you politely ask filtering questions? Looking at the pre and post communications, and parting ways, actually, if it's not a good fit. And that comes with a lot of resources, from checklists to sample emails, lists of conversational questions, and so on. So by the time they get to part 2, the meeting, we're really looking at making sure that you're in that right mindset, looking at how you develop that warm welcome, making sure that our structure feels really low pressure, but high trust. Looking at how you develop your listening skills, how you communicate your value. I've just given you a little taster today. Looking at how you manage their expectations in terms of market movements and volatility. And then crucially, how you discuss fees. We'll look at how you explain your process in a super conversational way, and then ask for the business. And if there are any objections, how do we turn those into opportunities? Again, this comes with lots of resources, from templates to questions to meeting structures and so on. And then lastly, we just finish off by looking at how do we make sure that what we send beyond the meeting is going to increase our conversion rate. And unfortunately, it's unlikely that you'll get ghosted, but it is becoming more commonplace in our culture, which is a real source of frustration for many of us. But I've got a template that has got very, very high response rates. So I'll give you that if you're interested in joining. The way it's structured is there are self-paced modules that you work through at your own time, and then we have 12 Q&A calls every Tuesday where you really get to practice the phrases, the structures, and so on. And then we have 2 face-to-face days where these are really practical days where we're doing lots of role plays and getting you really, really client ready. So when you think about the average value lifetime of a client, I've priced it so that just getting one client will pay for itself. You can pay in installments if you want to. And if you're part of a team, you can have a little discount. So just to recap, this meeting is one of the most profitable activities that you can do. The communication skills needed to run these meetings, I believe, are among the most valuable that you can develop. And for prospects, really, this could be one of the most life-changing meetings they have. When you have a financial advisor alongside you, your life just runs so much more smoothly, as this research that I pointed to at the start really shows. So before I take some questions, let's just run through the key points. Those 4 common mistakes were adopting the wrong mindset, asking ineffective questions, talking too much, and lacking a psychology-informed structure. All of those things can really snarl up our conversion process. When we're looking at balancing facts and feelings and framing our value, we need to get skilled at turning those little technical questions into the bigger questions. And that's how we can really frame our value, by demonstrating that the process that we take people through can answer some of those questions. And that's the process that will deliver the peace of mind that clients so dearly value. And I ran through my first meeting mentoring program So if you're interested in joining that, then do book a call. I've been running this as a pilot, so I'm actually just coming towards the end of the pilot. So my last intake of that scheme will be on the 21st of December. And the first 5 that join will also get my ACE Your Annual Review pack. So, as I mentioned, we've got plenty of time for questions. If anybody would like to ask me anything about my research or anything that I've covered or a particular challenge that you're faced with, we can spend a bit more time on mindset if any of you would like to. Please let me know. And if you haven't got any questions, for those of you that did specify that the mindset was your challenge, what are you going to do differently now that you know what you know about adopting the right mindset? I'd love to hear that in the chat, what you're going to do differently now that we've spent some time on that. Reflect on successful meetings and the outcomes delivered. Absolutely. Yeah. Think positive and believe in my message. Yeah. As I mentioned, my background is psychology. So I am a big believer in, so much power stems from adopting the right mindset. Of course, it's important to also have the structure as well. But, when you've got a structure that works, adopting the right mindset is the fundamental, underpinning of how that relationship can get off to a good start. Great. Okay. Well, I don't think anyone's got any questions, but if you have and you didn't want to ask them in front of lots of people, then you can just drop me an email if you would like to. And yes, if anyone would like to join the last of the pilots, the price will be going up next year. We've got some great results from the pilot so far. So yeah, it'd be super for you to join if you want to. And I'll end there. So thanks so much for your time. Take care. Adrian, I've just got your question. I will send the recording around so you can share that with them for sure.